couldn't believe what I was hearing. The words spewed forth from Chloe's lips like venom, each one stinging more than the last. "Is this some discount meat you picked up from the clearance section? How could you expect me to eat this garbage? Do you think that's how a real mother-in-law should treat her family?" I stood there, clutching the platter of perfectly seared steaks, my heart sinking. After hours of meticulously preparing the meal, this was the thanks I received. Chloe's eyes narrowed, her gaze piercing through me like daggers. "I'm sorry, Chloe," I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. "I thought it would be okay." Ethan and Tom exchanged bewildered glances, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden outburst. Chloe, however, seemed unfazed, her expression one of smug disdain. As I set the platter down, my hands shook, and I fought back the tears threatening to spill. This wasn't the first time Chloe had belittled me, but her cruelty never failed to sting. She had a way of making me feel small, insignificant, like a failure in my own home. Ethan reached out, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Mom, it looks amazing. Don't listen to her." But his words did little to ease the pain. Chloe's sneer said it all. She saw me as a worthless old woman, incapable of meeting her lofty standards. As we sat down to eat, the tension in the air was palpable. Chloe picked at her food, her nose wrinkled in disgust, while Ethan and Tom tried to make conversation. But the damage was done. I knew then that something had to change. I couldn't let Chloe continue to disrespect me in my own home, to undermine my efforts and make me feel like a failure. It was time to fight back, to show her that I was more than just an old, feeble woman. I was a force to be reckoned with, and I wouldn't be pushed around any longer. The next morning, I braced myself for another battle as Chloe barged into the kitchen, her face twisted into a scowl. "Maggie, I need you to go to that new bakery downtown and get me their famous cupcakes." I sighed inwardly, already dreading the task. "But Chloe, I heard they sell out within hours. I might not be able to get any." "Well, you better try harder then," she snapped, her tone dripping with condescension. "I simply must have those cupcakes for my book club meeting today." Resigned, I nodded and grabbed my purse, steeling myself for the inevitable long line and disappointment that awaited me. Sure enough, by the time I reached the bakery, the queues stretched around the block. I joined the end, praying they wouldn't sell out before my turn. Hour after agonizing hour ticked by, and as I inched closer, my hopes began to dwindle. Finally, just a few people away from the counter, the dreaded words echoed through the shop, "Sold out for the day." My heart sank, and I trudged back home, empty-handed and defeated. As soon as Chloe saw me, her face contorted with rage. "Are you serious? You couldn't even manage to get a few stupid cupcakes?" she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. I tried to explain, but she cut me off, unleashing a torrent of insults and accusations. Utterly useless. Can't do anything right. Pathetic excuse for a mother-in-law. The words stung, each one a slap in the face. I wanted so desperately to defend myself, to put her in her place, but the fear of losing Ethan kept me silent. As she stormed off, I slumped onto the couch, tears streaming down my cheeks. How much more of this could I take? Chloe's venom was slowly poisoning my life, and I knew I couldn't let it continue. That's when the idea began to form in my mind, a plan to show Chloe for who she truly was. It was risky, but I was tired of being her punching bag. If she wanted to see me as useless, then I would give her a taste of her own medicine. With renewed determination, I started plotting my revenge. Chloe thought she was superior, but she had no idea what I was capable of. It was time to teach her a lesson she would never forget. In the days that followed, Chloe's demands only escalated. It was as if the cupcake debacle had unleashed a new level of entitlement within her. She barked orders at me constantly, treating me like a servant in my own home. "Maggie, I need you to iron these blouses for me," she'd snap, tossing a pile of clothes at me without so much as a please or thank you. Or, "This living room is a mess. Clean it up now." I found myself walking on eggshells, desperately trying to appease her to avoid another outburst. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. "What is this, Maggie? You call this a cleaned living room?" she'd scoff, gesturing around the immaculate space. "I can still see dust on those shelves." The belittling comments cut deep, chipping away at my self-worth bit by bit. Yet I remained silent, too afraid to speak up and risk straining my relationship with Ethan. Tom tried to intervene a few times, but Chloe would simply brush him off with a saccharine smile. "Oh, Tom, you know I'm just teasing Maggie. It's all in good fun." But I knew better. The malice in her eyes told a different story. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Chloe sauntered into the kitchen and wrinkled her nose in disgust. "What's that awful smell? Please don't tell me you're cooking that cheap grocery store meat again," she sneered. I froze, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the kitchen counter. "It's just some ground beef, Chloe. I'm making meatballs." "Ugh, don't bother. I refuse to eat that garbage." Her words were like a slap in the face, and I felt the anger bubbling up inside me. But before I could respond, she turned on her heel and stormed out. As I stood there staring at the sizzling pan of meat, something shifted within me. A newfound determination took hold, a resolve to put an end to Chloe's reign of terror once and for all. I couldn't let her continue to disrespect me like this. It was time to fight back, to show her that I was not the meek, helpless woman she thought I was. With a deep breath, I started formulating a plan. A plan to serve her the very same cheap meat she so despised, but prepared in a way that would blow her precious little mind. A sly smile crept across my face as I envisioned the look on Chloe's face when she realized the truth. This was going to be the ultimate revenge, and I couldn't wait to see it unfold. A few days later, Ethan suggested we all have a family dinner together. "It'll be great to spend some quality time as a family," he said with a smile. I forced a tight-lipped grin, trying to hide the dread that washed over me at the thought of having Chloe in my home again. But for Ethan's sake, I agreed. The night of the dinner, I spent hours in the kitchen, meticulously preparing each dish to perfection. I wanted everything to be flawless, hoping it might impress Chloe, even if just a little. As we gathered around the table, the tension was palpable. Chloe eyed the spread with a critical gaze, her lips pursed in that all-too-familiar look of disdain. We made small talk for a while, but it wasn't long before Chloe's true colors began to show. "So, Maggie, what kind of meat is this?" she asked, poking at her plate with her fork. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "It's just some ground beef from the grocery store." The words had barely left my mouth when Chloe's face contorted in disgust. "Ah, seriously? This is supposed to be a family dinner and you serve us this inedible garbage?" Ethan and Tom exchanged a bewildered look, clearly taken aback by her sudden outburst. "Chloe, that's enough," Ethan said firmly, but she paid him no mind. "I mean, honestly, Maggie, do you have any standards at all?" "This is just embarrassing," she sneered, pushing her plate away. I felt the anger rising within me, but I forced it back down. This was all part of the plan. "Well, if you don't like it, you don't have to eat it," I said calmly, trying to keep my cool. Chloe scoffed and crossed her arms, a petulant pout on her lips. As the dinner progressed, I could see Ethan and Tom growing more and more uncomfortable with Chloe's behavior. But still, I remained silent, biding my time, because soon, very soon, the tables would turn, and Chloe would finally get the comeuppance she deserved. The satisfaction of knowing what was to come was the only thing that kept me from snapping. I was done being her doormat. This was my house, my family, and I wasn't going to let her disrespect me any longer. The stage was set, and the trap was laid. All that was left was to wait for the perfect moment to spring it on her. After Chloe's humiliating outburst at the family dinner, I knew it was time to put my plan into action. I was done being her punching bag, and I was going to make her pay for every single insult, every snide remark, every condescending look. I spent the next few days meticulously planning every detail. I scoured my old recipe books, dusting off techniques I hadn't used in years. This was going to be my magnum opus, a culinary masterpiece that would blow Chloe's mind. And the star of the show? That same inedible garbage she had so brazenly mocked, the cheap ground beef from the grocery store. A sly smile crept across my face as I envisioned the look on her face when she realized the truth. Oh, how the tables would turn. I started by sourcing the freshest, highest quality ingredients. Nothing but the best would do for this dish. Then I spent hours carefully dicing, sautéing, and seasoning, layering flavors with the precision of a master craftsman. Every step was executed with painstaking attention to detail. As the aromas filled the kitchen, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This was going to be a work of art, a culinary triumph that would leave Chloe speechless. Finally, the day arrived. I had invited Chloe and Ethan over for a special dinner, playing it off as a peace offering of sorts. As they arrived, Chloe's eyes narrowed suspiciously, no doubt expecting another subpar meal from the lowly Maggie. Little did she know, she was in for the surprise of her life. I ushered them into the dining room, where a beautifully set table awaited, complete with fine china and crystal glassware. "What's all this?" Chloe asked, her tone dripping with disdain. "Just a little something I whipped up," I replied nonchalantly, fighting back a grin. As I brought out the main course, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Is that meatballs?" "Why, yes, it is," I said, setting the steaming plate down in front of her, "made with the finest ground beef from our local grocery store." Chloe's mouth fell open, but before she could protest, I held up a hand. "Just try it." Reluctantly, she took a bite, and I watched with glee as her expression morphed from skepticism to utter astonishment. "This is amazing," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. And that's when I dropped the bombshell. The look on Chloe's face was priceless as she stared down at the plate of perfectly crafted meatballs. "This is amazing," she murmured, her voice barely audible. I couldn't help but savor the moment, the sweet taste of revenge dancing on my tongue. "You're right, Chloe, they are amazing," I said, a sly grin spreading across my face. "And you know what the best part is?" She looked up at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "They're made with the very same inedible garbage you so eloquently described at our last family dinner." Chloe's eyes widened in disbelief as the realization sank in. "No, that's impossible," she sputtered, shaking her head vehemently. But Ethan's voice cut through her protests. "Mom used to be a chef, Chloe, a really good one, too." Chloe whipped her head around to face him, her mouth agape. "What? You never told me that." Ethan shrugged. "I guess it never came up. But I remember her cooking was always incredible when I was a kid." I could see the gears turning in Chloe's mind as she tried to process this newfound information. Her perfectly curated world was crumbling around her. "So you see, dear," I said, my voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, "just because something is inexpensive doesn't mean it's garbage. It's all about how you prepare it." Chloe's face flushed crimson as the weight of her own words came crashing down upon her. She had been so quick to dismiss me, to write me off as a worthless old woman who couldn't possibly match her lofty standards. But now the truth was laid bare, and she was the one left looking like a fool. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room, desperate for an escape. "Oh, there's no need to say anything, dear," I replied, taking a bite of the meatballs and savoring the rich, complex flavors. "Just enjoy the meal." The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the sound of forks scraping against plates. Chloe picked at her food, her appetite seemingly diminished by the bitter pill she had been forced to swallow. As for me, I had never tasted anything so sweet. The victory was mine, and the look of utter humiliation on Chloe's face was a sight I would savor for years to come. In that moment, I knew that this was just the beginning. Chloe's reign of terror was over, and I was just getting started. The silence that followed my revelation was deafening. Chloe sat frozen, her fork hovering in mid-air as the weight of her own words crashed down upon her. For once, she was rendered utterly speechless. I savored the moment, taking another bite of the exquisite meatballs and letting the rich flavors dance across my tongue. The look of utter humiliation on Chloe's face was a sight I would cherish forever. Finally, she seemed to find her voice again. I don't understand," she stammered, her eyes darting between Ethan and me. "How could you let me believe you were just some incompetent old lady?" A humorless laugh escaped my lips. "Let you believe? Chloe, dear, you never gave me a chance to be anything else." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly caught off guard by the sudden tension. "Mom, what's going on here?" he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. I turned to him, my expression softening. "Ethan, sweetheart, there's something you need to know about your wife." Chloe's eyes widened in panic. "Maggie, don't you dare!" But I held up a hand, silencing her protests. "No, Chloe, it's time you faced the consequences of your actions." Taking a deep breath, I launched into the ugly truth, recounting every snide remark, every condescending glare, every instance of blatant disrespect she had hurled my way since the day we met. With each word, Ethan's expression grew more and more horrified, while Chloe sank deeper into her chair, her face flushed with shame. "And that's the kind of treatment I've had to endure from your wife day in and day out," I concluded, my voice thick with emotion. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Then Ethan turned to Chloe, his eyes blazing with anger. "Is this true? Have you really been treating my mother like this?" Chloe opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Save your breath, Chloe. I'm done with your lies and your manipulation. As far as I'm concerned, you're no longer part of this family." The words felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders, years of pent-up frustration and resentment finally released. Chloe's face crumpled and she turned to Ethan, her eyes pleading. "Ethan, please, you can't let her do this." But Ethan held up a hand, his expression one of steely resolve. "No, Chloe, I think my mother's right. This behavior is unacceptable, and I won't stand for it any longer." In that moment, I knew I had won. The years of torment, the constant belittling and disrespect, it had all led to this moment of reckoning. As Chloe dissolved into tears, begging and pleading for forgiveness, I simply turned away, savoring the sweet taste of justice. After tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. In the aftermath of that fateful dinner, everything changed. Chloe's pleas for forgiveness fell on deaf ears, as the years of pent-up frustration and resentment had finally reached their breaking point. Ethan was utterly shell-shocked by the revelation of his wife's true nature, and the man I had once known seemed to vanish before my eyes, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. "I can't believe I let her manipulate me for so long," he said, running a hand through his hair in disbelief. "How could I have been so blind?" Tom, ever the voice of reason, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Son, don't beat yourself up over this. That woman was a master of deception." Chloe's sobs echoed through the house, her cries for forgiveness falling on increasingly unsympathetic ears. "Please, Ethan, you have to believe me. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just—" Her voice trailed off, her excuses ringing hollow. But Ethan's mind was made up. "Save it, Chloe. I'm done with the lies and the manipulation. It's over." And just like that, the curtain fell on their marriage, a sad and pathetic end to what should have been a joyous union. In the weeks that followed, the divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. Chloe put up a brief fight, begging and pleading for a second chance, but Ethan remained steadfast in his decision. "She had her chance, Mom," he said, a hint of sadness in his voice, "and she blew it." As for Chloe, she retreated back to her home state, her tail tucked firmly between her legs. The once proud, arrogant woman was reduced to a mere shell of her former self, forced to face the consequences of her own actions. And what of our family? Well, it was as if a dark cloud had lifted. A weight had been lifted from our shoulders. The once toxic atmosphere in our home had dissipated, replaced by a newfound sense of peace and harmony. Tom and I reveled in the simple joys of life once more, cherishing our evenings spent together, free from the constant stress and tension that had plagued us for so long. And Ethan? He was like a new man, the light finally returning to his eyes. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and he could see the world and his family for what it truly was. As for me, I rediscovered the joy of cooking, pouring my heart and soul into every dish I prepared. No longer did I have to endure the sneers and insults of an ungrateful daughter-in-law. Instead, I basked in the genuine appreciation and love of my family, savoring every bite and every moment we shared together. The final image I'll never forget is that of a warm summer evening, the three of us gathered around the table, laughter and love filling the air. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated bliss, a reminder that true family is not defined by blood, but by the bonds of loyalty and respect that can never be broken. And as I looked around at the faces of my loved ones, I knew that justice had finally been served.